Hi everyone, I'm Angie Spong and I'm putting together a series of projects for machine embroidery. To purchase the project, please go to my website at www.angies.co.nz, and you can also follow me on Facebook at Angie's Machine Embroidery. Hope you enjoyed this presentation.
This is my Christmas placemat project. The embroidery design is the same as on the Christmas tree skirt, just a little bit smaller. There's a built-in pocket here on the right-hand side to place your knife and fork in here, and this is going to make your Christmas table setting look so lovely. When you've been to my website to purchase the project, you will immediately get an email with files attached with your embroidery designs, instructions and patterns. You'll have chosen either A4 or letter size paper. The PDF files, just double click on those and they will open in Adobe Acrobat Reader. Click on the print button and the print window will open. Then we need to set the page scaling to none. Just click your down arrow here to choose none, and that will ensure that your pattern pieces are an actual size. Now you can click OK here and your patterns will print out. When you've got your patterns printed out, then go ahead and cut all the little pieces out. The larger sheets will need to be joined where indicated. This is your layout sheet and we'll be using that to place the little patchwork pieces and getting them all in the right place. The first thing to do is to cut out your piece for the middle section for the embroidery. The size is on your instructions there, and also cut out a piece of your batting or fusible fleece. Fuse that on and then you can actually start doing your embroidery while we're cutting out the other pieces. The pattern piece for your middle section is only used after we've done the embroidery to trim that block back down to size. The other large section is your backing, so you can cut out one of those. That's my backing fabric there. Now we've got the little joining strips that go in between the centre blocks and the little patchwork piece there, so we need two of those. The pocket pieces, now these are cut one with the right side up, so we've got the lining there and the pocket lining with the binding there, so one each of those. Sections A and B, we need 6 of those. Now if you just cut your fabric out double, then you're going to end up with one each, a left and a right. So we just need to have 6 of those, and you can just go like that and sort those out. These little pieces, we need 4 squares. The little triangles that go in the corners, we need 4 of those. Now E and D are the same size, they're just done in different fabrics, and we need 4 each of those too. We need the batting for the right hand side. Cut 2 of these with the adhesive side up of your batting. So we need 2 the same there. You can tell the adhesive side, it's got the little dots on there for pressing onto your fabric. And then the left hand side, we just need to cut 1 of those. The embroidery design size and the hoop to use are all in your instructions there. For my machine, I'm using the 260 by 200 hoop, and I've just hooped that up with some tearaway and popped the hoop clips on. Now those blocks that we've cut out for the embroidery, if you just fold that in half and just mark the 2 sides midway and fold it in half lengthways as well, and mark the top and bottom midway points, then you can just line those up with the little notches on your hoop here. And I'll now go to my machine, bring up the embroidery design and baste that onto the tearaway. For the other machines, for your FAF 2100 series, I do have the design for the grand hoop. And for the grand hoop, we do need to turn the fabric sideways because it's going to do the design this way. And for machines that have got large hoops, the design will be split into 2 parts. While machine's doing the embroidery, we can get together our little patchwork pieces. Just lay them out on the layout guide and then we can pin them together from here. So that's the squares there. E are on the side. F is the little triangles, the top and the bottom. A is the side. Now I'm doing the left hand side, but the right hand side is just a mirror image. Right, now pin these pieces together. I'm going to do this seam and join the square to piece A there, the triangle on that side. It is a good idea to pin them so that you know which seam you're sewing when you get to the machine. So now I can go ahead and set my machine up with construction thread, and these are all 1/4 inch 6mm seam allowances. You do need to cut out your pattern pieces accurately, cut out the fabric pieces accurately, and sew your seams accurately so that the patchwork is going to end up exactly the right size. Just leave those corner bits out for the moment. I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot, which has got the guide on the side for sewing the seams, and that'll mean I'm going to do it nice and accurately. So I've sewn those seams together that we pinned last time and pressed them all in one direction. Now I'll just take that little top triangle and we will stitch that seam there. Take this piece. Now I've pressed those two seams in the opposite direction so they can just lock together when I stitch those so they match up. And this one to here, and then the bottom triangle to that last piece there. Now this one we're going to be sewing from that point to that point. We do have a little piece sticking out there which we'll just trim off later. Now I've got 4 triangles, and if you look at the sheet here, I've actually drawn a dark line through there to just separate them so you can visualize it more easily. Those seams have now been sewn together and pressed. As you can see, we have ended up with 4 triangles, 2 the same here and 2 the same here. So now we're going to sew these together. So we're going to bring this one over here, and we need to match these 2 edges and these 2 edges, and you'll notice that you do have just a little piece of this one just protruding over the end. That's how it's supposed to be. And then we'll sew this seam here. Again, we'll match up these 2 edges and these 2 edges. Then all I've got to do after that is to sew these 2 pieces together by joining the seam through here. So we can go ahead and do that now. That's got our left hand side all stitched up and pressed nicely. The right hand side, just don't do that last seam so we've got an opening for the pocket here. Now we just need to trim these patchwork pieces to size. Get your batting pattern and just place it over the pieces here, and with a rotary cutter and ruler just trim these little whiskers off around the edges. Turn that one around for the top half of the right hand side. Then you've got your left hand side pattern there for your batting. Just use that again for trimming that piece to size. Then we can take our batting pieces, 2 for the right and 1 for the left, and fuse the patchwork pieces onto the batting. So then we end up with 2 for the right like that and the 1 for the left. Now we can do our pockets. We'll take the lower right hand patchwork piece and the pocket lining with the binding extension, place that right sides together, and we'll just pin that along this edge. the pocket opening edge. Then we'll take the pocket lining and right sides together on the top patchwork piece there and pin along this edge. Now both of those seams get sewn with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. You'll notice that the patchwork and the lining here are at right angles, whereas this one sits basically on top. Both of the pocket seams have now been stitched, and I've got my little snippy scissors and just trimmed the batting out from the seam allowance to reduce the bulk. The top section, press the seam down underneath the lining there. The bottom section, fold the lining up over the seam allowance and then turn it back on itself around the edge there. Pin this in place along the seam line, and then we're going to stitch in the ditch through all the layers there. That forms your binding. When you turn that over, you can see now that the lining is exactly the same size as the batting. For the ditch stitching, I did change my top thread to red because it was all down the red colour there. Now we can put our pocket pieces together. Just pop the lower piece on top of the lining there and pin that together. Now the seam lines where the ditch stitching is and the stitching line here will meet, and I'm just going to pin this along the edge and then just baste it together with a long stitch on the machine, just like 3mm or 1/8 of an inch from the edge, so that it won't be seen when we do the next seam. That's all together there now, and you can see we have formed our pocket. The two right hand pieces have now been basted together. Get your batting pattern and place it over the top just to check that it's exactly the right size. Any excess fabric, trim that away with your rotary cutter. Now my embroidery's been stitching out while I've been piecing together. It's now finished. If you want any more instructions on doing the embroidery, have a look at my Christmas tree skirt video. It's got full instructions. This one's been taken out of the hoop. The basting's been unpicked and I've removed the tear away. Now we're ready to trim this to size. Get your pattern piece there. We've got a dot at the bottom and the top, which we need to match up with our embroidery. The top dot goes to the top of the star, and the bottom dot goes to the middle of the bottom of the base there. Just pin that on. Mark each of the corners there onto your fabric. Then you can remove your pattern and get your rotary cutter and trim that back to size. Here's one I've done already. Now we're ready to put this together. We've got our left hand side piece, our right hand side with your pocket, and the two joining strips. I'm just going to stitch the joining strip to either side of the pieces with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam. The two joining strips have now been stitched in place. What I have done is to do a large zigzag on the edge of the seam allowance. This just helps the batting to lie flat on the back when it's pressed. Now we're ready to do the backing. We need to press in all of the edges on the four sides of the backing. So take this over to your iron and press up 6mm or 1/4 inch. And then we're ready to stitch the mitered corners. So fold your corner so that the fold lines are together here and you've got a fold on the diagonal. The seam is going to be a 6mm seam from the edge here, so that's 1/4 inch in. I threaded up my machine to match my backing and stitched all four mitered corners. They are very small seams. Now open up that seam allowance and allow the top to form a little hat. Then you've got these two little ears just to trim off. Now turn that through to the right side, and there's your mitered corner. Now I've just got the other three corners to do. Your mat is now ready for the backing. Get your pattern piece and place it over the top of the mat. If there's any excess fabric around the outside edges there, trim those off with your rotary cutter. Now we're ready to put the mat into the backing. Force the corners up into the mitered corner of the backing. Turn the binding over the edge and pin that in place all the way around. It's looking good now. I've pinned the binding all the way around. Do make sure that you pin that over nice and firmly over the edge of the mat. Now I'm going to get my narrow edge foot on the machine. This has got a guide down the middle here, so I can run that along the folded edge, move my needle position over slightly and get my stitching even. Then the last thing to do is a little bit of stitching in the ditch through this seam line here on either side of the plain fabric. So just change your top thread to match this colour of your plain fabric and stitch that through. Give it a press and we're all finished and ready to go. I'm making 6 mats, so I've just got a few more to finish.